This is News to Share reporting live from outside of Managua, Nicaragua. There's a large protest movement that has been forming over the past couple months in an attempt to oust Daniel Ortega, the long-running Sandinista president of the country. Right now we are waiting for the protest to catch up here a little bit. This is one of literally dozens of protests that are taking place every day. We'll be here to cover this one for perhaps the next 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll likely be heading back into the Capitol to cover another protest in support of the president being held by Christian evangelicals. Feel free to post any questions you have, and I'll do my best to get them answered. My driver is keeping the car running, but I'm going to walk back and get a little bit closer. If I do any videos, it's going to have to be in Spanish, but I'll do my best to translate on the fly. I am in Tihuantepec, which is about 15 miles south of the outskirts of the capital of Managua in Nicaragua, in Central America. The call was for a 3 o'clock meetup here in the square, but things are running a little bit behind. Haven't had any fun rocket fire. I think they're trying to get everybody moving. This march is supposed to simply run up to the highway, the main highway that takes into the Capitol. Everybody's in their best colors. I'd be really interested to know, somebody must be selling all of these flags, because every protest that I've seen, there are tons of people running around selling flags and noisemakers, and I can't help but wonder if perhaps somebody's making a lot of money off of that. Let's get a little closer without getting run over. Yes, those are called tuk-tuks. They're essentially, I'll get a front shot of one. They're like little motorcycles, tricycles. Some of them are pretty tricked out. So the protests began April 18th. It depends on who you ask as to why they started, but so to speak, the straw that broke the camel's back was some austerity measures that Daniel Ortega attempted to impose. It would have seen increases in employee contributions and employer contributions to the Social Security system, while also reducing the benefits for retirees. Nicaragua has a similar population bubble to that of many parts of the world, including the United States. And his socialist government has, according to some, become increasingly neoliberal and friendly to corporations and not to the people, is the general accusation of many that are protesting. And the stated goal is to bring Daniel Ortega out of power. I'm hoping this protest gets moving at some point here soon. So the party of President Ortega is actually a socialist party. It roughly stands for the Sandinista Front for National Liberation. He was one of the main leaders that brought down the Somoza dictatorship in the 1970s, and then he spent most of the 80s fighting American-backed Contra rebels here in the country during the country's civil war that followed. So Daniel Ortega is historically left-wing, but over the years has, according to a lot of protesters, has left a lot of those ideals behind, and as such, Nicaraguans complain a lot about the conditions in the country worsening. I do want to point out, though, while I don't expect this particular protest to get violent in any way, some protests have become violent. There have been roughly 80 deaths since the protest began in April, and many more injured, roughly 900 people injured. There have also been accusations of forced disappearance and lots of arbitrary arrests and detentions. So the people are right to be a little tense. Currently, the main international organization in the country is the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is under the headline of the Organization of American States. And they have so far asked for peace and calm. Calling him a socialist dictator might be a bit of a misnomer. Again, while the party that he founded and heads up and it represents as president began as a socialist party, it would be pretty hard to argue that it remains socialist. As far as dictatorship, that's one that I don't want to answer. But I'm going to move back over to the taxi now, and we can film this from ahead. ¿Estamos listos entonces? Ándale. Sí. ¿Cómo? Sí, ya lo tengo bien. Looks like things are finally getting underway, but we really want to make sure that we stay in front of the protest. If you get stuck behind one of these, and it can take a very long time, and it's a good possibility I wouldn't make it to the next one. Still have people arriving. So this is a pretty small town that we're in right now outside of the city. Some people that live in the city commute from, or work in the city, commute from here. I'm also told that the area around here is very popular for pineapple growing. So there's a good chance that that you've eaten some local produce at some point. Started with some fireworks, but that's pretty typical. In some of the heavier clashes in other cities, especially some of the occupied universities, the students and other occupiers have taken to making homemade mortars and Molotov cocktails, burning tires, and building very literal barricades to try to hold back state security forces, which have their credible allegations that those forces have used lethal violence against the protesters. Sorry, fumbling around here a little bit, holding on to this car. I also, there was a truck back there that had an impressive audio array on it, so I'm going to be very interested to see if there are any speeches that come out of this. I'm also told that tomorrow morning there may be a very large demonstrations. Some of those have numbered in the tens of thousands, if not more, that may be taking place in the capital. So if I can get more information on that, I will certainly try to be there and cover one of the larger mass demonstrations. But right now, this is to kind of give folks an idea of the breadth of the movement here. This is happening in almost every town, every city, almost every day across the country, especially since the national dialogue between the government and the protesters fell apart late last week. And since that dialogue has fallen apart, the situation has very much worsened, and the protests have become daily. Roadblocks are set up across the country, and people are very, very angry. And if I don't know whether you can see it in the broadcast, but I'd say that the line of people is perhaps maybe a quarter kilometer long. They seem to have pretty good marshalling going on here to keep everybody together. And I think we may be the only press at this action. It's also worth noting there have been journalists that have been specifically targeted during these protests. So far, nothing from the international press, but it is a risk that is inherent in these protests. There have been a number, in the more violent confrontations earlier on, there were a number of journalists rather that were actually killed, and there were allegations of a couple of them having been specifically assassinated for their coverage. Those, however, were all local Nicaraguan journalists. From what I'm seeing right now, it looks like, so this was all originating from a park, and it looks like they're just getting everybody across the street into the right lane to make this a cohesive march. Also, if any of you wonder what happens to buses when they're decommissioned, and of course, if you're appreciating the coverage, I know that News to Share has a Patreon account that you're more than welcome to make donations to help us be able to continue this sort of coverage. I'm imagining when we get down here to where the road widens a bit, I might get out of the car and have the driver go ahead a bit and try to get a little bit of a closer up scene of the protests. But for right now, I'm really prioritizing keeping the car in front of the protests. It's also worth noting that even to get into this town, we had to go through the remnants of a roadblock that was a real traffic snarl. And it won't at all be uncommon for you to see the remnants of burnt tires, paving stones, etc., strewn about the place, evidence of earlier street battles and other conflict that has taken place during this movement. If you're just joining us, we are in Tehuantepec, just south of Managua in Nicaragua. We're covering ongoing protests here in this Central American country against the President Daniel Ortega. This is one of dozens and dozens of protests that are happening every day. We're just covering right now a relatively small town. This protest is slated to go out to the main highway that heads into the capital, Managua, to the north, which is only about 20 minutes away. And hopefully, once we get there, the plan is to probably cut the feed and head back into Managua, where we hope to cover a protest that is being organized, as I'm told, in support of Daniel Ortega, by evangelical missionaries here in the country. Also, given the number of fireworks they're using, I'm wondering whether there's going to be any left for whatever the next national celebration is. Make sure I have my press pass out and visible. Seems like we'll be picking up a couple people along the way. Sí, podemos adelantarnos ahí por donde está ese camión, esa. This corner might give us a better opportunity to get an idea of just how big this is, if we can get up here to a good spot. The one thing I will be keeping an eye out is to make sure that none of the Juventud Sandinista, the Sandinista youth, who often arrive on motorcycles, to make sure that they are not arriving, as they have been known to clash violently sometimes with demonstrations like this. They've also been accused of firing indiscriminately into the crowds. You can see the paving stones that these roads are made of have made building barricades and throwing stones at police and other officials that attempt to attack the protest pretty easy. Another commentator not long ago was telling me that the switch to pavement and concrete in many other countries has really done a number on the ability of the people to defend themselves. Luis, yeah, I plan on it once we get far enough ahead. Once this protest gets moving along, and I can get a good spot where we can park the car. But there is a rally following the protest. Once we get out to the main road, and at that rally, the intention will be more to be able to actually jump in and talk with people. So I think for now we're going to stay ahead of it. Otherwise, we may get caught in it for a very long time. But yes, I appreciate that, and I will be doing interviews.
A ver si puedes pasar por ahí, por donde está el se venden lotes, y después yo voy a correr hacia atrás, rapidito. Donde está el rótulo colgada. Sí. ¿Cómo? Ah, sí, buena idea.
All right, my driver is going to go ahead.
Y si no, sigue avanzando y yo le alcanzo.
All right, so I'm going to go back in. He's going to go up ahead and just keep moving for me. And we'll get a better idea of what's going on here. I'm going to put the phone down for a second. I got to tie my shoe. All right, and we're back, and it looks like there's kind of a motorcycle vanguard to this that's mostly doing the rocket launching and whatnot. And of course, plenty of people selling flags. There's flags everywhere. I'm not sure if I'll be able to interview anyone while we're moving, but I will do my best. And from some of the looks of some of the things that are arriving, it looks like there's still people joining the back, and I can see ahead that people are still coming out from back where we came from at the park. Buenos días, señor. Awful lot of motorcycles, but I still don't see anybody on foot. It looks like it's still a motorized caravan. Everybody's giving us a thumbs up. I think they're just trying to load as many people into trucks as possible. But it's kind of hard to talk right now with all the horns. Let's go back and see if we can't see some of these, some of the trucks loaded with people as well. And of course, as with any gathering in the region, whenever there's a large enough group of people, there'll always be somebody selling food. Now it looks like we might have some people actually marching. Yep. Quite a few people here. also worth noting that you should keep an open mind at the fact that many people may not want to talk to an American journalist. The United States has a long and storied history in this country of supporting the previous dictatorship and of also undermining the government that deposed it throughout the 80s, and which resulted in tens of thousands of deaths. So there is what I would argue is a pretty understandable reluctance or suspicion of foreigners here because of that. I'm going to try to get back ahead of the march. I can see my driver stopped up ahead. Looks like they're trying to get this march to be a little bit more cohesive. Seems like we're back at the front. Try to get back in front. You can see back up the hill the length of the march. And I think I might see my car up ahead. Having a good driver can really come in handy. Ah, there he is. And we're just getting back up in front so we can get back ahead of the march as it moves out towards the highway. No, ya tengo. Sí, ahí está. There's my car. He's got a crowd. All right. I think I'm ahead. I'm gonna turn around, relax for a second, try to get some larger shots here. Right here by Jehovah's Witness compound, which looks awfully fortified. It's interesting, no, this is not the highway, this is the road that goes to the highway. It's interesting that somebody brought up Castro and Chavez in light of Ortega. I'm not going to go into anything related to Obama. The United States has largely ignored Nicaragua during the 90s and 2000s. However, there are rumors, unsubstantiated, I certainly cannot confirm them, but there are a lot of rumors amongst Nicaraguans that Daniel Ortega is in a similar condition to Hugo Chavez prior to his passing a number of years ago. I'm told that he has blood cancer and goes to Cuba frequently for treatment of that. And there have been a lot of people who believe that it was actually his wife, who is the vice president, that it is his wife that was responsible for the initial violent response to the protests, and that perhaps Danielle is not actually in good enough health to really be managing this crisis. Now, again, I cannot confirm that. Those are simply rumors, things that people have been telling me. But it's good to keep an idea that is something that people have on their mind in terms of what they think the situation might really be. And again, it's give you an idea. We're here next to a Jehovah's Witness complex that looks actually really quite large. I might have to look that up when I get back to the hotel later. Looks like we've got the main front of the march. I don't know how well you can see. There's not really a zoom feature for this, but the march is now probably at least a half a kilometer, maybe more long. I still see people turning at that last turn, so it may be that it's even longer than suspected. But I'm gonna get ahead and get back onto the car that I'm on and keep moving along with the protest towards the highway. Ándale. Bastante corriendo para mí. Sí, para quitarme la panza, ¿no? A ver. Get back into this car and keep my feet off the seat. I should also point out it's really hot right now. Like really hot. So sorry if I'm getting a little winded from running around. From where I can see here, I know you probably can't see on that screen, but it does look like that. The line is still going all the way back to the corner. I can't see the corner anymore now, but up to this point, I think that we can safely say that this is at least 3/4 of a kilometer, if not a full kilometer long of people. And except for this little advanced party here, it's mostly pretty well put together. I'm actually starting to wonder whether maybe they don't think we're the lead car. ¿Quieres tomar una pausa para que llegan, pues? O sea, estacionarnos acá al lado un poco. Asking the driver to pull off to the side a little bit. Bueno, o sea, si unos motos nos pasan está bien. Ellos no hacen nada. Sí, porque la mayoría todavía están allá atrás, hace como unos 100 metros tal vez. Gonna wait here for folks to catch up. I'm actually going to pause the feed for a moment, and we'll be right back. All right, we're right back with you. This is Ben reporting. Ben Holmes reporting from Nicaragua, just south of Managua, and we're at a protest in a small town of Tehuantepec. And you can feel free to ask me any questions. Right now, we're covering one of dozens of protests that have been going on daily across the country in an effort to bring down the dictatorship or the presidency, depending on which side you're on, of Daniel Ortega, who's been in power for about 12 years now. And right now the protest is moving from the town center, and it's moving out towards the highway, towards Managua. It is not scheduled, I'm told, to march to Managua. That's about 15 miles to the north, although other protests have from all across the country. The goal now is we're going to cover this protest for a little while longer anyway. I'm not sure whether we'll stay with it until it gets to the highway, but then we will be heading back into Managua to attempt to cover a protest there that is in support of the president being held by evangelical Christian groups. And cruising along here this slow is leading us to stall out here and there, so I apologize if it gets shaky at times. The folks that are directly behind us seem to be the runners ahead. The main body of the protest is much farther behind. Just to point out to folks who might just be turning in, again, this has been Holmes. I'm covering with News to Share here outside of Managua in Nicaragua. These protests have been going on since April 8th and were brought about largely because of austerity measures, although depending on who you ask, it may have started before that with a number of different reasons. But the protests initially for the first couple weeks were responded to with what the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights indicated was state violence that resulted in dozens of deaths, hundreds of injuries, and many arbitrary detentions. So it is worth noting that there have been instances where some of these protests have turned violent, especially if police or other state security forces arrive to try to break them up.
Estamos esperando a que alcancen.
One of the protest marshals says we're trying to hold to make sure everybody keeps up. I guess part of the problem of having a protest with vehicles and people marching, everybody on these motorcycles wants to go fast. Kind of inclined to think from a purely logistical note, might be a better idea to have the walkers in front so they can set the pace.
¿Cómo cuánto tarda
tuning in, again, we are in Tehuantepec, which is a small town just south of Managua in Nicaragua in Central America. We're covering just one of dozens of protests daily in an attempt to oust sitting president Daniel Ortega, who many accuse of being a dictator, after following violent confrontations when this protest movement began on April 18th. We're now starting to approach some of the areas where parts of the road were dug up, presumably to use against security forces. There's a couple places down here where they really tore it up. You see some graffiti here, "Que se rinda tu madre," which roughly translates to let your mother resign or surrender, I guess would be the better word. Which is kind of in response, it was actually an old Sandinista response, and there have been calls by the government. The government has actually used a number of slogans that protesters attribute to the pre-Sandinista Somoza dictatorship of the 1960s and 70s, and now it seems that the protest movement is kind of throwing some of those slogans right back at the current administration. Starting to get fireworks again. It had been a while. In the capital, the sound of those fireworks is almost 24 hours a day at this point. At night, it definitely builds. The nighttime in the capital and in other cities brings about often violent confrontations between the protesters attempting to oust the president and supporters of the president. And of course, there's accusations from both sides that that one or the other is a paid protester, or that they're working, for some other interest. Accusations have been leveled that the supporters are not actually really supporters, but poor gang kids from poor neighborhoods being paid to show up and harass and sometimes murder protesters. On the flip side, many within the Sandinista movement or people who support the government and the president have accused these people of being imperialist stooges in the hands of the wealthy elite, and any other number of accusations. Whether any of these accusations are true is really hard to determine. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I've spoken to dozens and dozens of people, and it seems to come down to which side you are inclined to believe, rather than much in the way of factual evidence of any of these claims.
¿Qué se supone que es adelante? ¿Qué se supone que es adelante o nomás están parados? Ándale. Y ya estamos más o menos cerca, ¿no? Sí, donde estaba todo roto la carretera.
And we are at right at the front of this march now, and we've got I see one of the guys on the left or a couple of these guys on the left are carrying what have been used as homemade mortars. They're basically metal tubes that opposition supporters have been firing, sometimes homemade mortars and rocks and whatnot, at police as a means of self-defense against police who are often armed with much heavier ordnance, of course.
Got some of the youths with those improvised mortar launchers right in front of us. And at this time so far, this protest has been entirely peaceful. Just a lot of noise. Wondering if Ford back in DC is wishing maybe he had a car to ride around at protest. What's the verdict, Ford? Do you wish you could ride around in a car? Just to give everyone an idea, prior to this movement, prior to these protests that began on April 18th, Nicaragua was known primarily as being one of the most peaceful countries in Latin America. Certainly one of the lowest homicide rates in Latin America. It continues to have one of the lowest rates of economic inequality, although it is very poor. But the violence, the violent response to the initial protests really shocked a lot of people, and many have blamed that initial violent response on how long these protests have lasted, kind of pointing out that the people, unlike in some other countries where they may be accustomed to larger amounts of violence regularly, that the people were really shocked by that level of violence and have responded very angrily and, I would argue, understandably, in the face of really violent government repression. People are very, very excited about this. They want this president gone. They want a new administration. Although the question remains, who would replace Daniel Ortega? Who would take the place of the current president if he were to be removed? That is a question I have not yet heard a solid answer to from really anyone. There doesn't appear to be anyone waiting in the wings, and without another figure or another politician, it's anyone's question, or it's anyone's guess, who could come to power if Daniel Ortega is indeed removed from power. Even the traffic is heading inbound. We're seeing clearly a lot of support. We're now kind of behind the motorcycles. They're still ahead of us now. I believe we may be coming up on one of the first areas where barricades had been erected, or what remains of them anyway, from some of the earlier days of the protests. ¿Qué tal, señor? Usted está aquí con la manifestación.
Correctamente, únicamente solo liberando ahorita esta turbulencia que está ahorita con Nicaragua.
He says that he's here to remove the turbulence and remove the violence that has been happening in Nicaragua. ¿Y usted de aquí de Tehuantepec?
Lo que queremos ahorita es libertad y expresión de todo Nicaragua.
He says that he wants liberty and he wants an end to repression in Nicaragua. Gracias, señor.
Gracias.
on a personal note, I really like the Jeep that's in front of us. Like over to my right here, there's some sort of like a resort hotel kind of park. I've seen a few of those. For the most part, most people here are not wearing masks. The masks usually come out when they're up against state forces, which I would say is probably understandable. But at this point, it looks like everything is still going very peaceful. Ben Holmes. I'm reporting from Tehuantepec in just south of Managua, Nicaragua. I'm reporting on the ongoing unrest that has been a stranglehold on this country for about a month and a half since April 18th. And we're seeing now just a small protest, a relatively small protest, leading from this town out to the highway towards Managua, where the protest is slated to end there. But these protests have been part of an ongoing movement as an attempt to remove the sitting president, Daniel Ortega, from power. The Sandinista president, Daniel Ortega, is perhaps best known for being one of the leaders, if not the leader, that brought an end to the Somoza dictatorship in the 1970s. However, as soon as his Sandinista forces were able to take power and remove the dictatorship, the United States intervened during the Cold War and began arming and funding the Contra rebels, mostly in the north. This led to an almost 10-year civil war, more than 10-year civil war, in which the United States was very involved, including things such as the Iran-Contra affair, for which Oliver North was convicted and later pardoned for his role in providing weapons illegally to the Contras here in Nicaragua, through sales of arms, prohibited sales of arms to Iran through Israel. So the United States has a long and storied and very controversial history in this country. Daniel Ortega was removed from power as the elected president in 1990. He returned to power in 2007 through elections and has been in power now. This is would be his third term. And people are saying that he no longer represents the interests of the people and that he should now be removed from power. The real spark that set this all off was austerity measures that were attempted in April that were very poorly responded to, though many would say that there were a lot of things that came before that, including the treatment of the elderly through the Social Security system, as well as Chinese business interests relating to a transcontinental canal, which also contributed to Ortega's decline in popularity. And if anyone still watching still has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. I'd be happy to answer them.
interesting you say that. That is a question that is absolutely in the back of people's minds. What side would the United States fall on if the United States were to get involved? Honestly, I'm not convinced one way or another. At this point, some murmurings out of the State Department, so far unsourced murmurings out of the State Department, have indicated that the United States is actually in support of ousting Ortega. However, there may be some conflict from within the U.S. business community, which now does have, and also the international business community, which does have significant investments in the country. So it's not clear where a country like the United States would fall. If you speak to a lot of people who are against Daniel Ortega, one of the reasons that they complain about him is that he's become too close to the United States and other countries like European countries, and they accuse him of being a neoliberal. They accuse him of leaving the socialist ideals of the Sandinista revolution behind, and so it's really anyone's guess who would support who if this did have any further escalations in that direction. But let's hope for the people of Nicaragua that that those sorts of things do not come back again. I assume that what Randall is referring to is the Iran-Contra affair, which did come to light in 1986, in which Colonel Oliver North, the National Security Council under President Ronald Reagan, was accused and found guilty of illegally selling Israeli weapons, setting up a front company to illegally sell Israeli weapons through Israel to the government of Iran, which was at the time not supposed to be getting those types of weapons from us or anyone else. And when those arms sales were revealed, this is of course during the Iran-Iraq War, in which the United States was openly supporting the Iraqi government against the Iranians, while simultaneously, covertly selling the Iranians weapons. When Oliver North was found guilty of that, it was the highest level official in the White House that was confronted with those allegations. He did end up being found guilty, though he was later pardoned, I believe, by the George H.W. administration, as well as really anyone else that had been brought down by that investigation. But it's pretty generally accepted knowledge. It's not very controversial to say that the United States did use those funds to illegally provide weapons and training to the right-wing Contra rebels here in Nicaragua, who were found even by the International Criminal Court of having committed gross human rights violations, murdering people in the tens of thousands. And so, as one might expect, there is to this day a certain level of animosity or at minimum suspicion of any American involvement in the region. Though I did speak to one individual a few days ago from the north of the country where the Contras were strong, and he seemed to actually be quite supportive of the idea of a similar U.S. involvement again. We seem to be approaching, I believe, one of the main spots where the road had been dug up. I think I see it in the distance. It's probably another 5 or 10 minutes if folks want to stay with us until we get out to the main rotunda where the rally is to take place following this action. At that point, I believe that this action will be ending, although I would suspect that they will stay there on the main highway, blocking the highway between Managua and the next city to the south, Masaya. It's anybody's guess for how long, but I've only paid the taxi driver for 3 hours, so let's hope it doesn't go much longer.
Ya estamos a las 2 horas, pero le pago más. ¿Qué?
Vamos yendo a la rotonda, yo avanzo y me voy, nos vamos allá para que le tome a toda la gente cuando entra.
Sí, sí, ya que vamos a la rotonda unas fotos y ya nos vamos. Ok. Perfecto. Sorry about that, just figuring things out with the driver. And so yeah, we have decided that once we get up to the roundabout at the highway, we'll cover just a little bit of the protest arriving to the roundabout, and then I will be headed back to Managua, where I may or may not be broadcasting further today from back there in the capital. It's starting to rain a little bit. It's just the beginning of the rainy season, so that's another thing that I have thought about is what impact, if any, the rainy season would have on the ongoing movement. ¿Me puedes pasar la bolsa? Tengo que sacar la pila. Gracias. Apologies, folks, moving the camera around a little haphazardly. I need to get my battery out. Gracias. Kate, it's interesting you say that. I've addressed that a couple times so far. Given that many of the protesters' accusations against the government are that the government has actually gone too neoliberal and too friendly to foreign business interests, it's a question as to what side any U.S. involvement might actually come down on. I suppose one should none, but if there were to be, it's anybody's guess what side they'd fall on. Well, folks, I apologize, but I seem to be having a power problem here, so I may have to cut it short, and I will try to get back to you when we reach the end of this protest, if I can get the power issue resolved. Again, this is Ben Holmes. I'm reporting for News to Share, live here just south of Managua and Tehuantepec. In Nicaragua and Central America. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll try to check back shortly.